Welcome to Roberta Glass True Crime Report. Today, Meredith Elizabeth, the Queen of Persuasion, is back to talk about Sebastian Burns and Atif Rafay, Part 2. Stay tuned. Welcome, Meredith.
Thank you for having me.
It's always a joy and a pleasure to talk to you about any case, really. So before we start, I just want to say that my show, this show, Roberta Glass True Crime Report, is now on iTunes. So you can find it by looking up Roberta Glass True Crime Report. And also, I created on this channel, on YouTube, the best of my favorite, I don't even know if it's the best of, but some of my favorite episodes of 2018. I created a playlist for them. So if you're interested, that is up. So, Burns and Rafay. We're talking today about the murder of Atif Rafay's family by Atif Rafay and really Sebastian Burns, his friend. Two Canadians done in the Rafay family had recently moved to Washington State. Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's where the murder happened. So this case is really interesting because what we talked about last episode a lot is whether they fled or didn't flee to Canada after the murder. And so they're Canadians, but the Americans really prosecuted them because it was done in America. So it's an interesting case because we have two different, the Canadians did the Mr. Big Sting. I'm sorry, did I get that backwards? The Canadians did the Mr. Big Sting, and they were prosecuted in America.
Yeah, which is interesting. I mean, there's a whole bunch of interesting dynamics there, too.
Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit about Mr. Big Stings later, but what I first want to talk about is Burns and Rafay, their makeup of their character, what their relationship is, and Sebastian Burns is often pinned as the sociopath, and Atif Rafay as the follower. What do you think about that?
I've evolved my thinking on that, and when you watch the documentary and hear people talk about Sebastian especially, they talk about how smart he is and how manipulative he is. And when you see the traditional sadistic sociopath, they have the ability to read people's emotions, take advantage of it, and be able to say exactly the right things and do the exact right things and con people. I've realized Sebastian isn't able to do that. And if you look at him, you look at him in trial, and after they're convicted, he goes on a 2-hour rant about how his lawyers and the jury and the judge is incompetent. And you look at his time in prison, and he's having a horrible time. He isn't able to manipulate people. People don't like him.
What do you mean? What do you mean when you say he's having a horrible time?
From my understanding, and you hear Atif, and what's interesting is I think if you notice about Atif, he always says the right thing. Mm-hmm. He said the right thing in court. Even now, he's out of the both of them, he's the one that's interviewed. And apparently, and this I take serious issue with, that because Atif is 5'2", he's in protective custody, which is another building, and apparently very nice, where he's a professor and lives a grandiose life. And Sebastian went to general population. And apparently, since he got there, he has just evolved. He's on antipsychotic medications. He refused to eat. He's constantly at odds with the guards and having a hard time. He isn't able to adjust to prison, and he's constantly in isolation and administrative segregation because he cannot follow the rules, and he doesn't have what Atif does, able to manipulate people into feeling that he's the victim and feel bad for him. Mm-hmm. I think that Sebastian is actually not the sociopath here. I think it's Atif.
I would happen to agree with that. And have you seen any recent interviews with Sebastian Burns? Because I haven't.
No, I don't think he's been interviewed in years. I think that, and I tried to look him up to see like what he looked like now. There's one picture of him taking in like the last decade.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah.
His parents go and see him and his family, but no one else has interacted with him. And
what does the picture look like?
I'm sorry?
Can you describe to the audience what the picture of Sebastian Burns looks like?
If he had facial hair, his hair was a little bit longer. And when you heard his father describe it, the father who's ridiculous, but his father gave the implication that he's having a really hard time in prison. And he's on antipsychotic medication. Mm-hmm. So they don't give those out easily, which means that he's probably had some mental breaks in there. And he's having a very hard time mentally and not able to handle it in there, to the point where the Innocence Project people who love to interview people that are quote unquote wrongfully convicted, they haven't interviewed him. He hasn't been on camera or a phone call or interacting with the public at all. The only people that have access to him is his parents and his sister. I wonder why that is.
Well, I think it's by design that they're keeping him away. And the picture I saw of him, his hair was much longer, and he had a grizzly beard, and he looked like a wild man, like someone from the 60s. Like that guy who ran that vegetarian cult, and they had... you know what I'm talking about. Was that the Love Family or whatever? It looked like that, like someone from the 60s. And I think he does himself no favors when he speaks, Sebastian Burns. He looks like someone he sounds and comes off as like someone you wouldn't trust. Do you agree?
He's the most obnoxious person I've ever seen. I've never heard of someone at sentencing in front of a judge saying how incompetent the judge's decisions were right before he's going to sentence you. That's insane to do. And for 2 hours. And actually, as we talk about it, my question is, if he's on antipsychotic medications and, his style throughout his life has been very clean-cut, very neat, present himself very well. So the fact that he's looking like a wild mountain man, and on antipsychotic medications leads me to believe that he's having, some serious mental issues in there. And how long has it been going on?
Right as we hear an ambulance siren go by at
maximum
volume. Yes, what?
As we're saying that, because some people saw that rant and said it was like the ramblings of a crazy person. True. So has he had, how long has he had mental issues is the question.
Right, and an interesting part that came out in one of the YouTube videos on the case that I saw, it's not in the confession tapes, was that there was going to be a witness for the prosecution, a former high school girlfriend of Sebastian Burns, who was going to testify, and that Sebastian Burns told her that he thought it would be pleasurable to find out what it felt like to kill someone, or he wanted to find out what it felt like to kill someone. Did you see that?
That was she came forward too late because they were in the middle of the trial when she came forward, and they asked the judge to admit her, and the judge said, had you brought her forward a year before, I would have, but it's too late to be able to prepare the defense for it.
And I thought I'm sorry.
That's the only reason she was left out, but Sebastian doesn't deny saying it. What he says is, it was a late night conversation. We were all hanging out, and I think they maybe had smoked weed, and he was saying, who knows what we were rambling on about.
It's his response to it is that's one of I think probably the last interviews or the most recent interviews I've seen is in that Dateline about the case. I believe it was a Dateline. And he says, so that's almost exactly my impression too. I was like, he didn't deny saying it, but he said, I can't remember the conversation well enough to refute it. Which is the most,
he said it.
Response. Yeah, I was pretty sure.
And
too.
What's interesting is he didn't. I'm surprised he didn't say, I have no idea what she's talking about. she's lying. It's interesting he admitted to it. Why did he admit to it? He didn't have to.
Do you think he admitted to it because he's proud of his sociopathy in some way, or
it could be that he didn't want it. You know, when somebody's sitting there and saying they're lying and they're lying and they're lying, after about the fifth person, you sort of lose credibility because all of these people aren't lying. Yes. So maybe he conceded to this
weakly
because he felt it didn't really mean anything.
Interesting.
I don't know.
I think you're right. That would be my best guess too. Yeah. And well, we're off to a very agreeable beginning of this episode, and very quite different from our last combative episode about part one.
Well, not combative.
No, it wasn't combative. I love debate. We both love debating, so
I love a good, healthy debate.
Oh yeah, which is unusual. We don't have a lot of company in that, but I had the same take too, and I was so glad you brought that up. Anyway, Atif Rafay, when he speaks, his language that he uses, he has this a great vocabulary, and he's very polished. And what did you think about? There's also another character in this, right? The guy who was originally charged,
Jimmy.
I'm sorry,
Jimmy Miyoshi.
Yes,
Jimmy.
Right. It just escaped me for a minute. Jimmy is the first name? Jimmy Miyoshi. I always remember as the last name. And he was the smartest of the three. He was a friend he lived in the house afterwards, the house that was bugged and surveilled after the murders that Atif, Sebastian Burns, and Jimmy is it Miyoshi or Nayoshi?
Miyoshi, I believe.
Rented. And he knew about the murders beforehand. They were telling him that they were going to murder Atif Rafay's family, and he said he just listened.
Yeah, this stood out to me. He said, when they said, well, how'd you feel about that? And he responded, I was neutral. And I can't make heads or tails of that. Because if I was in a car with high school friends and they were planning on killing one of their parents, I wouldn't be neutral. I would have a reaction to it. It's possible he didn't take them seriously. That maybe they were, kids in high school say stupid things. Mm-hmm. But it's just interesting. Or he could have, when he said that, I suspect, because that's, no matter what, your reaction to two people planning a murder in front of you wouldn't be neutral. You would have a feeling one way or another. I suspect that he was in on the planning.
Yes.
Or he would have said, I was bothered by it. But I think he didn't want to incriminate himself, so said, I was just neutral and listened.
My impression also that either he's the coldest son of a gun in the world, or he's a sociopath, and three sociopaths all met, recognized each other, and became friends.
He wasn't there. He chose to, he said he was busy at work. I don't even know if he had a job.
Right.
So, but I don't think he wanted to be involved in it. I think that, maybe he knew about it, but if he wanted involvement in it, he chose not to go down there. He chose to, I can't believe he was busy at work. I don't know what kind of career a 19-year-old has. But I think he chose to stay away from it, but he knew enough about it where he could have stopped it.
Right. And so what do you think about when Sebastian Burns and Atif Rafay presented a defense in trial? They suggested that it was done by, Muslim extremists, and that there was a third person there. The way the blood spatter landed, that there was a third person there. Do you think there's any chance that third person might have been Jimmy Miyoshi?
No, I don't. No. I think that if there was he was in Canada. They have phone records of them calling them. Witnesses put Jimmy in Canada, the two. I think the two of them were fine committing this crime, and I think Jimmy just didn't want to actually be physically involved in it.
And he changed his name, Jimmy did, and moved to Japan, and which I found very interesting. Usually you just I would think moving to Japan would be enough, but apparently...
Oh, I think that this was absolutely his parents doing.
Uh-huh.
I think he was in his early 20s. His parents found out what was going on and said, you know what, you're leaving. This is not going to ruin your life. We're going to send you back to Japan.
Change your name.
And he did very well there. I don't think that was his choice. I think his parents most likely said, you're leaving Canada now. We're putting you in Japan. You're not going to be involved in this at all. Right. And it worked until they contacted his employer.
Yes, very interesting. And when Sebastian Burns was asked about Jimmy testifying against him, why he did it, he said, well, I understand because he took his gun, he made a gun out of his fingers. Oh, it's so obnoxious,
yes, I know what you're referring. And makes a handgun and points it to his head.
And he had a life sentence pressed to so his obnoxious. Head. And he knew it would go off if he didn't testify, which was a very dramatic answer. Then Atif Rafay, this is a really good example of how the different styles that they have in interviews. Atif Rafay was asked the same question, and he said, well, and this is the way he talks, well, I was outraged. I was like, wow, you sound outraged. I was outraged, but I reserve my real outrage for the prosecutors. And that's always so interesting. And this is the same thing with, just to go to the West Memphis 3 case once again. But, when Jesse Miskelly's brought up, who has confessed so many times, he confessed the first time, which is what supporters call the false confession, forced false confession, but they don't talk about the other 5. 2 of which are taped. Right. 2 of which are taped. And they say, well, aren't you, angry that your supposed friend or acquaintance, depending on who you talk to, fingered you in this murder that you say you didn't commit? And they're never mad. They're never mad.
Well, you don't want to piss off the witness against you. The one thing you don't want to do is the person may or may not testify. If you sit there bad-mouthing them,
no, this is after the fact. After the fact, I'm talking about. They're never angry that they didn't.
Jimmy Mayoshi may still go to the media and tells what he knows. So they're the same way the Black Memphis 3. They never talk bad about Jesse Miskelly because Jesse Miskelly could still go to the media and tell what he did if they say bad things about him. So they live in fear.
I take it, I think that could be true, but the way I read it, my read on it is a little different. My read is that they know in their deepest hearts of heart it's true. And it's hard to be really mad at someone, even if they're for telling the truth. For whatever
Damien
reason.
Echols doesn't give a crap about it. No, absolutely. No, it's the same reason he never talked about Jesse Miskelly, because if he's saying the kid's a moron, da-da-da-da, and calls him names, Jesse Miskelly's going to get pissed off, and he's going to go tell people what he did.
But do you see any anger when you see anger when Echols talks about him?
If you ever notice, Damien Echols really never hammers him. Damien Echols calls everybody else horrible names, accuses people of being pedophiles.
Oh, yeah.
But Jesse Miskelly, he's very kind to.
But that's
because Jesse Miskelly has a power he can't take away from him for the rest of his life.
That's true. That's true. That's true.
The only thing those 2 kids fear is Jesse Miskelly one day may tell the truth. That's the only thing in life those kids have to fear, or grown men now.
But so you see fear, not anger. That's
because if the third person who was there ever comes out and tells the story to the media, it takes everything. It takes their lives away from them. It takes the publicity. It takes the money. It takes everything away from them. Mm. That's their only real fear in life, and that's why they never badmouth them.
Right. Interesting.
Because they have power over them. They have the power to take their entire lives of the wrongful conviction away from them. Right. They're the only people.
Interesting. Interesting point. So,
that's my take, at least.
Smart take. Rafay and his relationship with his autistic sister, Basma. What do you... Okay, so she was the one who lived for a while after, and then eventually succumbed to her injuries from the baseball bat that was wielded
within a
by
few
Burns.
hours.
Within a few hours. But she was moaning, and he heard her moan and didn't go and check if she was okay, never touched her. And his answer was, well, I didn't know what to do. I didn't even know how to put on a Band-Aid.
Well, and that was, the police had a very good point when that was his response, and that is really the only red flag of what they said that day. Because I don't know any human being that could hear somebody in the next room, hear them moaning, and especially somebody who can't take care of themselves, can't defend themselves, that, and call the police, go outside and wait in the front while there's maybe something that you could do.
Right.
I don't know how, especially your sister. How do you hear your sister dying, essentially? And no one in the world says, oh, well, I don't have medical training, so I didn't want to go in there.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about whether or not you could give them surgery. It's about maybe there's something you can do to help them at the time.
Right.
And that's unreal to me.
I think that's Go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, I just don't know. That's why I think that, Sebastian Burns really didn't know these people. Mm-hmm. So he has less of a relationship. But that's why I think Atif is the worst human being out of the both of them. How do you hear your sister more or less making sound she needs help and walk outside? And one of the neighbors said, yeah, before the police got there, I saw two kids waiting in front of the house. They were smoking cigarettes and sort of joking around. Mm-hmm. And he was doing that as his sister was dying, and he could have helped her. Who does it? I don't know what kind of human being can do that.
And what kind of being? We're New Yorkers, so we see, stories all the time. Woman jumps, gets pushed on the track. Stranger helps them. Stranger gets mugged. Good Samaritan stories all the time. And I even see dog stories, dog rescues, human in need. So, I bring that up when people talk about Dassey or they talk about Atif Rafay being so upset they didn't know what to do. It is a human instinct to help, even if you can't help effectively, to eat or even to check the condition and find help. It's so disturbing to me that
even if you can't help,
he tried to normalize that behavior.
Even if you can't help, even just give that person comfort.
True. Good point.
His sister was sitting there lying without any help, probably terrified as she's dying, and her brother's outside casually smoking a cigarette and joking around with his friend outside. Like, how does that happen?
Right. And, as someone who's been in that position, it's very personal to me, and I don't think it is to other true crime watchers, fans, observers. When these kind of elements come into true crime cases where there's a victim that needs help and it's either ignored or, like in the Dassey's case, he victimizes the victim that needs help instead of helping. I don't think it's very real to people. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think that a lot of and I do it myself too, that a lot of true crime people who enjoy the genre, when they're looking at these cases, they look at them as if they're movies. Mm. It's very easy to forget that these are real people, and that's why we're so casually able to talk about it. Because to some degree, we detach ourselves from it and look at it like it's a movie, and that's why it's entertaining for us. Right. When we have to make it personalized and realize these are real human beings, it's not as much fun.
Yeah, and then,
so I think that's a natural part of a lot of it.
And you bring up a movie, and Burns and Rafay had plans to write a script. We mentioned it a little bit in the first episode called The Great Despisers. And an element, their plan was to get... use the publicity of being suspects in this murder, but get somehow exonerated and cash in on their public exoneration and use their victimhood, like my whole family was murdered, knowing it's untrue, if we're taking the position that they're guilty, which I do, knowing that that's untrue, and just raking in the money from their innocent fraud tour and innocent fraud movie. I mean, I guess they were ahead of their time, right?
Well, if my family had just been slaughtered, I wouldn't want to write a play about it. That's pretty telling. That's how detached Atif was from his family.
They wanted to make themselves heroes, though. He said,
and that's why, heroes. That's what these quote-unquote mafia people used to get in. They told Sebastian, we'll give you money to invest in your movie.
Which was $250,000. What kind of budget for a movie is that?
I have no idea what the hell these kids were doing. It's so bizarre to me.
I know,
I'm with them until they get to the Canadian border and go home, and then after that, I don't get what they're doing.
I would just love to ask Jimmy. I think he would be the one who would have maybe even some idea of what their plan was regarding that movie, that screenplay, more than Sebastian Burns or Atif Rafay, and either one of them. I think he would have the best idea.
Oh yeah, the reality of it.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to me is how smart those kids were.
Mm.
They knew that they bugged that house in Canada that the three of them lived in for a year, in the house and on the phone. And those kids were able to not in the house the entire time ever reference it, ever. And Sebastian Burns later tells the mafia guys that, oh, don't speak on the phone. My house and phone is bugged.
Yeah.
Like, the level
how did they know that?
How careful they were. And for a year it was bugged.
How did they know that?
They were unbelievably bright in the planning and execution mainly of this murder, where they were very bright kids and thought of everything. Mm-hmm. But they just weren't I'm sure they studied, other cases that had happened and see where people get caught, and they realized what everyone does, that where you get caught is when you tell someone.
Well, let's talk about the greatest part. Speaking of, when this Mr. Big Sting operation started happening, there was another Mr. Big Sting that the police did that made the papers. Remember this?
Yes. It's absurd.
And they almost shut down the Mr. Big Sting operation on Sebastian Burns because he was talking about it on the phone, and his friend said to him, oh, that sounds like Mr. Big. You're meaning Hazlitt, the guy who played the Mr. Big Mafia character. And why do you think that do you think it's the need? He was so in such desperate situation in his life that he needed the money that he would ignore all signs that this was a Mr. Big Sting? Or
I think part of it too is, the thing about teenagers is they have the classic, this won't happen to me. Mm. They have a detachment to, and this is all teenagers. They do stupid things because in their heads it will never happen to them. So, the Mr. Big people heard them talk about how somebody was just arrested, and FBI agents, the Canadian ones, were pretending to be mafia people. Mm-hmm. Sebastian's talking about it. The agents hear it, and they call a couple of days later to check in to see if they think if they were caught. And Sebastian didn't put it together, but brought it up to them.
Yeah, and, right.
I think this is just stupidity. But I think that's that normal teenager, oh, it won't happen to me.
Yeah.
That Sebastian thought he was smarter, and if they were fake agents, he would have been able to tell. And that's his arrogance.
And the thing that Sebastian Burns said about Hazlitt, or it was actually the character that brought him to Hazlitt, he said, I was interested that he was so, I was, flattered or something that he was so interested in me. And I think they really played Sebastian Burns as the better target, someone who could be manipulated by flattery and ego. When they first give him the job, that's like $200. He doesn't want it. It's not good enough for him. And
he complains about the amount of money, and that's his arrogance. And then they up it and have him and Jimmy Miyoshi running around like morons, depositing money in other accounts, and they think they're laundering money.
Yep.
And they pay him a couple thousand.
Yep.
It's all very interesting. They're the worst mafia actors I've ever seen.
Wasn't that the worst performance ever? I just couldn't believe that anyone who had, even if I were in high school, I didn't meet real, like, low-lifes, really getting to know low-lifes till later, after high school. But I would think that if someone did that kind of, swearing every other word, but using old words like toasted him and, oddly, strangely, law enforcement words in between swear words, and just the delivery that it would just somehow play, like I would get a feeling in the pit of my stomach that it was phony, but...
Well, the thing about the mafia and what they're great at is they don't really talk about what they do. So the fact that these guys were bragging around talking how they, quote-unquote, smoked people should have been a sign that they're not really mafia people.
Toasted, please. Toasted.
Because mafia people wouldn't be discussing randomly with random strangers how they're killing people.
Right.
So, but Sebastian just, I don't get it.
It's very cringy listening to those tapes. Don't you feel? I feel embarrassed for Hazlitt and embarrassed.
I'm embarrassed for everyone there.
Yes.
There's no one in there where I was like, that's a really good job. I'm just like, this is terrible all around. Just horrible.
I think
and they have like mullets.
And they're like it just looked like no one you would be afraid of,
I would just be like, this person is a loser, and he actually doesn't do anything because nobody who actually does things brags that much about it.
Oh, such a great point.
Yeah, but then what's Sebastian's frame of reference? I don't know how much life experience he had, but to most people, they would seem ridiculous, and I'd be like, this guy, people that have a lot of money don't talk about how much money they have. People that commit a tremendous amount of crime don't talk about it.
No, people.
So the fact that all these guys do all day is talk about all the crimes they commit.
Yes.
Bizarre.
I know, and it's so funny. We maybe have a career. Maybe we should start a acting school. Unfortunately, Mr. Big things are going the way of the dodo. But I feel like we could start some kind of acting school for undercover. I would say that's exactly what you don't do. I would use them as an example of what undercovers should not do and how unbelievable it is. It is wild.
And it's just, I just never, criminals don't act like that. And if they did, they would have been arrested years before because they're telling everybody everything.
I know. There's a tremendous strength in silence, But...
And the mafia excels at that. That's their main thing. They don't talk about what they do, and that's why they get away with it. These guys are
So let's
talk
about Sebastian Byrne's defense that he was in fear. Do you think that was a good defense?
I think to some degree he was scared that they were going to get caught. I think that's realistic. I mean, you look at his face, he's reading the paper, but what's interesting is when he's reading the paper, he says, well, how do they have that?
Can you explain what paper you're describing?
Oh, I apologize. That the Mr. Big, he never actually said, I apologize.
Are you at a railroad station?
I am. I'm by the railroad station. That they go in and they meet with him something like 7 or 8 times, and he never admits to having any sort of involvement in the crime. Then they get to the point where they give him a piece of paper listing the evidence that the state has against them. And this was a contention when it was being admitted because some people argue that the piece of paper had lies on it. And what the piece of paper actually listed was what they believed that the DNA test would find. Mm-hmm. So when it talks about how they found Sebastian Byrne's hair, they didn't actually test that yet, or there was something wrong with the test where the test didn't actually find that. Mm-hmm. So there was some discrepancy over how true the piece of paper Sebastian Burns saw was. But when you see him read it, he says, well, how is this possible? They can't have that. Mm-hmm. Because he knows that there's something wrong with it because it's not 100% accurate, that paper. But that should have been the symbol for him, that if he knows there's no possible way that evidence was left there, a specific one, mm-hmm. that he was being played. Right. But at that point, they say to him, listen, if you are going to go to jail unless you tell me what you did. And I think that any person would have fear. I would have fear.
Yeah, but he never says, like, look, this could never be me. How did they
Oh, I don't, the fear was not that they were going to kill him. His fear was that he was going to jail.
Yeah, definitely. And he even expresses that to Mr. Big at different points. He suggests that he wants the police station in Washington State set on fire. He says if we ever get arrested in the U.S., they're going to test our DNA and take bodily fluids from us. His big fear was getting arrested. So,
which is a natural fear, I think, for everyone.
And there wasn't much evidence against them.
A reasonable fear.
They had the hairs. Let's talk about some of the evidence. They had the hairs. They had Sebastian Burns' fingerprints on some of the boxes that were tipped over, right?
Yeah, the thing about the evidence, and this is a very interesting case where if you take that confession away, they don't have enough evidence close to convict them. They have hair in the downstairs shower, which could have, but the father's blood on the walls that was rinsed away. Mm-hmm. But Sebastian Burns, it could have been argued that, yeah, he was using that shower, and that shower was, somebody else got in it. But his hair was left over because he had long hair.
Right. Some very comfortable Muslim extremists decided to shower, somehow remove his clothes and shower in the place before he left with a half-alive sister moaning. That sounds reasonable.
But it's stuff where without the confession, they would have never been convicted. Because how do can you prove that Sebastian Burns didn't take a shower earlier that day and someone else, let's say it's possible, the whole thing is the whole case is based on it's possible. Mm-hmm. It's possible that somebody went into the shower and took a shower that wasn't Sebastian, and Sebastian showered earlier and that's why his hair was there. Mm-hmm. The boxes in his room is interesting because they found boxes turned over in the room that Sebastian was sleeping in as if there was an intruder in the house and they were going through things. But nothing was actually taken, and the boxes were knocked over but not gone through. Mm-hmm. And Sebastian Burns' fingerprints were found on the interior flaps of the boxes. So, which reasons that Sebastian Burns at one point opened those boxes. Mm-hmm. The question is, and the lawyers could easily argue, well, yeah, he was in there for a week, there was boxes, he got curious and wanted to see what was in them. Mm-hmm. That's possible.
Right, and there was also some unidentified cigarette butts, DNA, in the backyard. There was a hair found in Atif Rafay's father's bed that didn't belong to any Sebastian Burns, unknown person. So there's plenty of unknown DNA lying around to blame it on.
Other DNA found in the garage, but they think that may have been the cops.
Right, sure.
And what year was this?
What year was this? Hold on.
What was it, 90?
So, yes, 1994. And that is when also, Meredith remembered correctly, that is when The Lion King, which was the movie that was their alibi, was showing. So, we got through this whole 2 episodes without ever mentioning Teresa Olsen's name.
Oh, but quickly.
Name. Yes.
I remember why I brought up at 94.
Yes.
In 94, DNA was really, really new. Mm-hmm. So the police contaminated the scene constantly because it was new to collect things. So they found other DNA in the garage with blood traced out there. And the reason why was they handle crime scenes completely different now because the cops had no idea how to handle DNA. Mm-hmm. And so that's why some of the scene, their stuff found the cigarette butts in the backyard was probably from one of the cops. And then whatever they found in the garage, they determined definitely was from the cops.
Right.
And about the hair in the bed, from the way it works is that if they find a single hair with DNA on it, unless they find more than 1 or 2 other spots with the same DNA, it's generally dismissed because somebody could have picked it up throughout the day or in the laundry or whatever it was. So there was one foreign hair in the bed with the father, but that DNA wasn't seen anywhere else in the house.
Okay. So Teresa Olsen, we have just a few minutes left.
She's very unattractive.
She was Sebastian Byrne's lawyer, and they were caught together having sex, and she got disbarred for a couple years because of it.
Oh, great story. So,
how did that happen?
I'll tell you exactly how it happened. So what happens is, she goes in, her excuse was it was a quote-unquote a hug that got out of control.
How much has that happened to, please write in the comments how many times that has happened to you? A hug
that got out of control, sir. And they had a system where there was apparently an upper level where the corrections officers would stand on. The way it sounds is like risers almost.
Mm-hmm.
And 3 of them were looking down watching this. And they see what's going on. And one of them actually says to the sergeant, because it was going on so long, how long is this going to go on for? And it was that obvious. And they report it. It goes to the judge. She gets dismissed off the case. They have to get a new legal team. And he extends the trial a year. And that's when they get, but she's out of her mind.
Right. And they paint that like she was such a great advocate and it was such a terrible thing for his defense. But he gets great lawyers who come in. Oh, I bet she was a great
advocate.
Yeah. You think she was in love with him? Seriously?
I don't know what would drive her to do that. You have to be a moron to not realize that corrections officers can see you. Because if they're not witnessing this on camera, they were witnessing it from above. So if they could see her, she could probably see them. And I can't even imagine the positions going on here that I guess they thought they were slick. Right. I don't know why you would do that.
Right. And it's in contrast to Ted Bundy, who got his girlfriend or wife pregnant in prison, who was friendly with the guards and let him do it. You know, Sebastian Byrne is has what my mother would call an unfortunate personality, that he has no friendships with these guards, that they rat him out and the lawyer and Teresa Olsen out right away, and she gets busted for it.
And he's so obnoxious. I get why he would do it, because he's obviously in prison and, you know.
A man.
I don't get why she would. Her self-esteem must be horrific.
Hybristophilia? I don't know.
And the thing is, he's so obnoxious and annoying. I can't imagine him being outside of prison wanting to have any sort of physical relationship with him, never mind as an inmate on trial for murdering a family.
Well, you get pillow talk.
Didn't she fly to Japan?
You get pillow talk with him saying that he wants to kill people. That's a plus.
So gross.
So gross, right? Who flew to Japan? She did.
She flew to Japan to talk to Jimmy Miyoshi, who I think Jimmy really did not want to be involved and rat his friends out and be involved in, but he was forced to.
He's great at self-protection. That's if we've learned one thing about him from this case. He's the one who didn't confess anything to Hazlitt and is out of prison probably because of it.
Yeah, he was the smartest one, where even then, I guess they must have had a pact to never speak of this, no matter what, never speak of it. And when they're sitting in the room and Sebastian's in there, and Hazlitt's saying to him, like, tell me what you know, and Jimmy's like, I don't know anything.
And he says, I want to know why you want to know, which is great. But we have just a couple seconds left.
Well, thank you so much for having me on again.
Oh, yeah, it's always the best talking to you about these cases. I really appreciate your insights and your smarts and your time. So thank you.
Thank you so much.